So I'm going to start off saying a few words about the new world, or the new world as we perceive it. My name is Johan Henrikson. I'm the CEO of Verisec. I'm also one of the co-founders of the company. So I was there when we founded the company about 14 years ago. Today, Verisec has expanded from being a very, very Swedish company into being a European and EMEA-focused company. We are today present in multiple European markets and in Dubai as well as having an office in Mexico that's covering off our South American customers and helping them along as well. And that office has also started quite a lot of sales activities. We are a publicly traded company on Nasdaq First North. Our main focus for a number of years has been the banking industry, finance industry, and the public sector. Those have been really our main customer groups. And that's probably the case with a lot of security firms today, because these are critical infrastructure. And that's where we see early adopters of security technology. So energy sector is another critical infrastructure. What we are seeing, however, is that that's changing. It's no longer critical infrastructure really requiring IT security. It's everyone. And that's something that has changed, and I'll come back to that in more detail. But what's driving the development in multiple markets, and I'm not only talking about Sweden, but in multiple markets around Europe? Well, digitalization, of course, that's the main driver that we've seen in the past years. But it wasn't until the beginning of this year when there was a conference in Davos, the World Economic Forum, when somebody decided to call this the fourth industrial revolution. Now, why would you do that? Why would you call it the fourth industrial revolution? Well, basically because the velocity, the scope, the system's impact on the developments that we're seeing today are unprecedented. It's no longer a linear development that we saw during the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the beginning of the 21st century. We've basically seen an exponential development of what we can do with technology in different ways. We see nanotechnology, we see deep learning, we see a whole lot of different points of technology, and that's something that I know one of our later speakers will dwell more upon as well. But it is really changing the way we think about competition in these different industries. I'll give you two examples of disruptive technologies, and you've all heard them before. Uber for taxis and Airbnb for hotels. One is a sharing economy, that's basically Uber. The other is supply and demand matching, that's Airbnb. But we say things like, okay, this is really disruptive technology. What do we mean by that? And I tried to Google that and see if I could come up with something to illustrate the point, because you don't think in terms of disruptive when you book a hotel room in Paris or an Airbnb apartment in Paris. But let me try to illustrate this, because somebody created a heat map from 2008 up until 2015 of Airbnb apartments in Paris. And in the next 40 seconds or so, you will be seeing the beginnings of Airbnb in Paris appearing somewhere here in the middle. As we progress through time, you'll be aware of more and more dots appearing. Of course, illustrating the fact that you have more Airbnb apartments. And as we get closer to 2015, and that's a year ago, we suddenly realized that you could almost decide that you want to live in a specific street, and you could book an apartment somewhere in Paris. That's disruptive. This is something completely different. I talked to an old friend of mine from university. He works today at Schroders, and he invests in among other things, in hotels. He gets seriously worried when he sees things like this because the hotel industry is changing very, very rapidly. That's an illustration of what we mean with disruptive. But it's not the hotel business only. It's not only the taxi drivers of the world. It's every single industry. And this picture doesn't give credit to all the industries and all the fundamental changes that we're seeing. But we can take a few examples. We have the gambling industry. It's going mobile. People are playing at the casinos and so on. People are using their computers to access a web interface or some gaming app, but it's going into the mobile sphere. And the entire gambling industry is now being subjected to the same anti-money laundering regulation that banks have had to adhere to for the past few years. That's changing the entire industry. They have to think in terms of know your customer. They have to think in terms of security. And they have to think in terms of how do we make money in this new industry. So it is radically changing the dynamics within the gambling industry. Retail, you've seen for years and years, people are moving online, buying more and more, everything from furniture to clothes and what have you not. The automotive industry, let's not even start there. Self-driving cars. Imagine if self-driving cars were around in 5 or even 10 years' time. What would that mean? Well, taxi drivers, do we need them? That's a waste of time. It's quite a lot of taxi drivers if you think about it. Truck drivers, do we need them? Bus drivers? Waste of time. There are entire populations of employees that are working today that we may no longer need because technology is making such advances. That will change the society we live in. So what's this doing? Well, it is creating awareness. It's creating awareness around security-related issues. And some examples, Internet of Things. I'm not talking about light bulbs that you can control through an IP address. That's completely uninteresting. I'm talking about buildings that are aware that you are entering that building. I am talking about much larger things where you can start collecting information, collecting data, aggregating that data, and making decisions based on that, making your life more easily navigated. Now, this generates a whole lot of data. A lot of it may be completely uninteresting to a potential criminal. Other pieces of that information will be interesting. So at some point, we need to decide what do we need to protect, how do we protect it. The mobile trend, think about it. This piece of technology is not really that old, but we live with it basically 24/7. 97% of the time, this device is no longer than 1 meter from my body. If I forget it, I go back home. I pick it up. It's a platform. It's a computing platform that allows me access my bank, the government, all instances of my life I can control through this device. Of course, that's changing in terms of awareness of security. We need to start thinking, do I trust this device? How do I trust this device? And how can I build applications that will propel me into the next generation of applications and an internet? Cloud-based applications. We're no longer putting our data within the perimeter of our defense. This is since a few years back. It's not really a new trend, but we're seeing more and more of it. We're using cloud-based services to store data. And only the last couple of years, we start thinking about how do we address the security-related issues? How do we own the keys for encrypting data in the cloud? How do we manage those? I read an article from Microsoft about 2 years back because we had a customer who asked me, how can I manage my own keys in a Microsoft cloud environment? Well, Microsoft had 2 strategies. Either use a completely insecure method, which was a waste of time, or basically take a briefcase, go over to Microsoft and visit them. That was their idea of managing your own keys. That does not work. So driving an incredible development here in terms of key management, driving how do I identify myself to these cloud environments, how do I build combined environments within our corporations, or within our organizations where I can use those applications we have installed internally and combining that with things that are installed in a cloud environment. We as users are becoming more convenient. We're used to this platform. We want the ease of use. We want that flow in the way we work. We no longer accept the old mainframe style systems. And that's also driving something. It's driving requirements within the arena of IT security. We can no longer stand here and say, well, you really need a smart card, and you need a reader, and you need this driver, and you need this application, and you need this and this and this and this. It's just not going to be practical. People want to use their iPads, or people want to use their mobile devices to access information, to sign contracts, to do different things. And that convenience is driving the requirements within the security arena. And of course, as we progress, as more data is available, as more value is stored within the internet, the threat will increase. I think that's inevitable. More money out there, more criminals that want to take it. So the threats will continue to grow for the next couple of years, at least. And of course, it's driving regulation. And we have a section on regulation a little further on in the agenda, so I won't stay too long on this picture. But we're moving from something called EBA requirements into PSD2. Now, these are just letters and numbers, and they make maybe no sense to you. But for some of you, you know exactly what it means. It means allowing people access to bank accounts, allowing third-party applications to access those accounts that you as a bank have kept a secret for so many years. Now, what will that drive? My belief is that that will drive a whole new generation of startups that will deliver services based on those accounts. We'll see an emergence of a lot of those fintech-type companies delivering different services into the banking industry. And that's a threat. That's a threat to what exists today. It doesn't necessarily make it bad, but it will change the dynamic within the banking industry. ADAS requirements, what does that entail? Well, basically we could use this device to sign digital contracts. We no longer need the smart card reader, the application in order to sign a legally binding contract. Now that's pretty cool stuff. My belief is that signing documents was something we all wanted to do, or at least a lot of our customers wanted to allow their customers to do. The problem was that the infrastructure to put into place to allow this was just too expensive. It was too cumbersome. It was too rich in support. It was just unpractical. But with this device, it suddenly becomes more practical. So a lot of our customers are looking at trying to find security solutions that will work across their different channels of communicating with customers. And most of our customers, they have some sort of a mobile application today, some web. We have a number of customers within the banking industry that use kiosks for different purposes, face-to-face meetings, or even telephone banking. You would say, telephone banking should be completely dead by now, but it's not. It's alive and kicking, and it's working quite well. But over time, these channels were developed with different types of security put in place. So typically for the telephone, you would have a PIN code, for instance. When you go into a branch office, you would show your ID. In the kiosk, you'd probably have another PIN code because it was not the same as the telephone bank. In the web interface, you might have had a token type device or something else. And of course, in the app, you might have a fixed password or other things. So security is developed over time, and what we're seeing now is a push towards trying to find security solutions that will span across multiple channels of communicating with customers. And the goal here with it is really to enhance the customer experience. And we have a whole section coming up on enhancing customer experience because it is becoming more important. Putting the customer in focus. How does that user actually use the systems, and how can we as security vendors or as vendors of other pieces of technology enhance that experience, drive more traffic to those sites, and make sure to build a deeper relationship with that customer. Because we know from studies that if you can get people to use your application more, then you will be a more loyal customer. You will buy more services from that bank or that institutions. So it is important to keep in mind, how does this that we're doing in terms of security or an application, how does that create an enhanced customer experience, a smooth experience, but at the same time give us or give the customer that feeling of trust and security that they need to perform those actions. So some of the work that we continually do, of course, is online services. And what we're seeing there is, in the most basic of worlds, you use a mobile phone or you use a token device or you use something equivalent and you log into an online, say, bank or a gambling site or something else. That was version 1.0. What we're seeing now is the mobile and the web, they're really more and more integrated. In Sweden, we know of systems like Bank ID that you've seen, or a lot of you have seen before. But in that intersection between these pieces of technology, you start getting demands for other types of services as well. Being able to sign online transactions, for instance, or approve online transactions. We have secure messaging. If you have established a level of security in terms of communicating with this device and made sure that you've issued it to the right person in the first place, then of course, why not use that application to provide sensitive information to that user as well? So secure messaging, extremely important. I'm sure that those of you that work in the banking industry, you've seen that there's a lot of overlay types of technology out there. Applications like Tink, for instance. Tink is an application that accesses basically the bank's APIs for their mobile interface. That's the easy way of describing it. Now, some banks are not really happy with that development. Other banks, like SE-banken, they decided to buy pieces of that technology or that company. So different perspectives there. But in terms of security and what banks want to do, in some cases you want to protect yourselves from overlay services because they are taking that customer experience that you've tried to build for the past few years and trying to move that into their own application. So not only is this a question of online services and securing the access to it, securing the digital identity, but it may also be things like protecting against overlay services for the simple reason that if we've established a trusted relationship with you as a person, with your phone, then why not use that technology as well to stop overlay services from working? Remote work has been one of these applications that we've worked with since, well, I've probably done it for 25 years. This is a trend you just think, why doesn't it disappear? Everybody can probably work from home. Today, it's about 1/3 of the world population. 1/3 can actually work from home. That's quite astounding. It means accessing all your corporate or public or your organization's information from a remote location. And that, of course, puts into view a number of security-related questions. How do you access? How do you identify yourself? How do you protect that communication? And so on and so forth. And it is becoming more important. A lot of our UK-based public sector customers, and we have Ray coming up here in a few minutes talking about the work that he's done. A lot of our public sector customers have actually chosen smaller offices than they should, or in comparison to the number of employees they actually have smaller offices than for that number of people, for the simple reason that they assume that people will work from home. That is now an assumption. 10, 20 years ago, that was still something exotic. It was something that people in Apple or Google or whatever talked about, but you didn't see it that often in public sector or in banks. Today, we see that more and more. And it does put requirements into perspective. Remote signing I mentioned, and the ADAS requirement. I think this is something that we're working quite a lot together with Thales, that will come up just after me now. And it is an important area because allowing access to your private signature keys in a cloud environment through a mobile phone is a challenge. It's a challenge in terms of technology, and it's a challenge in terms of rolling it out and making it really, really simple. However, if we can solve those problems, then we can establish a platform where life becomes so much more easy when we want to sign, for instance, something related to houses or loans or whatever. Host card emulation is also types of projects that we work on continuously. Not necessarily only the host card emulation part of it, but the payment side of it. We don't really know where the payments are going right now. I don't think you could ask any large payment institution to tell you exactly where we're headed. We have lots of competing different types of technology, everything from QR codes to Apple Pay to host card emulation systems to QR codes that you photograph and you use in different ways. We are in that time before we've seen what dominant design will be. But irrespective of the solution that will be dominant design, we will see the need for securing that platform and making sure that we can trust that the payments that we're doing and the relationship we're creating will hold for the future.